Peter Dutton said there he's very happy for the election to be a referendum on energy and on nuclear, and clearly that is now what it will be. This is the biggest policy announcement from Peter Dutton to date in his time as leader, and his biggest gamble. And I say it's a gamble because while this announcement today was very heavy on criticism of the current rollout, the problems when it comes to rolling out renewables, the costs, the impacts on regional communities. He even had quite a few jabs at people investing in this clean energy transition as well along the way. It was, however, quite light on the detail of what this alternative nuclear approach will be. We got the sites, I'll show you those in a sec, but we did not get whether they will be large or small reactors in each of those sites. That's to be determined. Most importantly, we did not get the cost of this, nor at the end there any commitment that we'll get those costs before the election. So in a sense right now it is a blank cheque commitment. Taxpayers will foot the bill. He argues it will be cheaper in the long run compared to the renewables approach, but can't yet explain how. We don't know what we would do in the meantime. The first of these reactors would be more than 10 years away. All 7 would be not until sometime in the 2040s, but we'd be relying a lot more on what we can still string out of coal, plus a lot more gas. Whether that would be any cheaper than the current approach of shifting to renewables, again, we don't have any numbers from the coalition on whether and how that would bring down power prices. So, look, yes, a lot of detail left up in the air there at the moment. Here are the sites, though, we're talking about. I think we've got a map to show you 7 sites in total in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and WA and South Australia. Point to make here about some of them. 2 of them, Liddell and Loy Yang A down in Victoria, are owned by AGL. And AGL is very clearly on the record saying when it comes to nuclear, it does not see this as viable. It does not see it as an option because of the cost, the build time, public opinion and so on. A number of them are state-owned as well, whether it's the one in WA there, the Muja Power Station, whether it's the Callide Power Station in Queensland, or indeed the Tarong Power Station in Queensland. And those state governments are also opposed to going nuclear. Peter Dutton indicating that you could win them over with a bucket of money. But right now, both sides of politics, certainly in Queensland, his own LNP colleague, the LNP leader there, David Speers, is opposed to this plan as well. So it would take a lot of convincing of the states, the owners in some cases of these sites. But the pitch here is a pretty simple one. The rest of the world's doing it, all these top economies. Why can't we? They, of course, started a lot earlier, and if we'd started 20 years ago, as many experts point out, maybe this would be viable. But right now you've got so much renewable being rolled out. The big question is whether it's too late for Australia to go down this path.
Now, David, we're expecting a news conference from Chris Bowen, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, shortly. He did take a question on this at a separate event. Let's have a look at that.
It's not really an announcement. We know that Mr Dutton wants to slow down the rollout of renewables, and he wants to introduce the most expensive form of energy that's slow to build. But today, we've seen no costs, we've seen no gigawatts, we've seen no detail. This is a joke. But it's a serious joke because it threatens our transition.
Yeah, so the government getting on the front foot there, David, on that lack of detail. Mr Dutton has tweeted the concept design, saying of the world's 20 largest economies that ours is the only one not using nuclear energy or moving towards it, and that it works with renewables and would allow Australia to get to net zero. But as you've said, a lot more detail to come on that.
Yeah, and look, small modular reactors, a lot of work is going on in this space around the world. In fact, the US Department of Energy's committed a further, I think it's $900 million just overnight to further progress plans. Small modular reactors have the benefit of being factory made and therefore easier and quicker to install. But the technology is, still in the works, if we can put it that way. So that's why they can't be too definitive about this. Even ANSTO, the Australian nuclear experts, say that, when it comes to small modular reactors, let me quote them here, all sorts of challenges, including economic appraisals, financing, legal frameworks, supply chains, the regulatory framework. So they see it as a technology that's in its infancy and relatively untested. So big question marks over SMRs and large-scale reactors. We know the CSIRO last month found would cost twice as much the power delivered as renewables backed up by batteries and pumped hydro, other firming technology. But the battle lines are now there. You can see where the government's going. Chris Bowen and Parliament's back next week. We'll hear a lot of this. Where's the cost? How do we know what taxpayers would be up for here? And as I say, it's unclear whether we'll get any costs before the election. We know the coalition also won't be telling us what the impact would be on emissions between now and 2050. They won't go to the election with any interim targets. So on costs and emissions, a lot of detail missing in this announcement.
Also getting the states on board, David, so some of them have other ideas on this. We heard from Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, this morning. He pointed to the ban on nuclear, amongst other things. Let's go to that now.
It would cost maybe $200 billion for small-scale nuclear reactors to replace existing coal-fired power stations in the state. I don't know where that money's going to come from. It certainly can't come on the backs of hard-working taxpayers in New South Wales. They just can't afford it. We've got a prohibition on nuclear power in the state. My government's not going to waive it. My understanding is that the Queensland opposition and government won't waive it either. So I think there's a few questions about whether this is a fantasy or a pipe dream or it's a legitimate energy policy.
So, David, New South Wales among the states that have legislated their own bans on nuclear. How would federal policy fit with that?
Well, once again, Peter Dutton is suggesting that with money, you might be able to win over the states here to lift those bans and agree to these plans. Look, the $200 billion figure there used by Chris Minns is an overstatement. He's talking about replacing all of the coal-fired power stations. That's not what Peter Dutton is suggesting. But how much it would cost, as I say, we really don't know at this stage. I suspect they'll have to give some greater clarity on this. Worth noting, though, that right now polls are suggesting higher levels of support for nuclear power than we've seen previously. Peter Dutton referenced a news poll and a Lowy Institute poll just a couple of weeks ago. It found about 61% support. There is frustration in parts of Australia about the rollout, this transition to a clean energy future at the moment, the impact that's having in different parts of the country. And that's what Peter Dutton is really trying to tap into here, this frustration over transmission lines, over costs. But would his alternative actually fix that problem of costs? Without the numbers, it's very hard to know.
David, we're getting a lot of questions coming through to the ABC from our viewers and listeners, many of them about cost, about viability here. One of them saying, if the Libs win the next election and get the ball rolling on this, won't this just be canned by the next Labor government? So that's a concern from some of our viewers.
Yeah, well, the first thing would be lifting the ban federally, and that would require legislation through the federal parliament. John Howard, the Howard government, put in place that ban. Now, that would mean, sure, if the coalition's in power, they could pass it through the House of Reps. But in the Senate, you're still going to have a crossbench that you would need to win over, and there's no sign of that happening. So that's the first hurdle to be cleared, if you like, before we get to some of the other hurdles we're talking about with the states, with the owners of these sites, and so on. So, yeah, a lot of hurdles to be cleared in this. Look, Peter Dutton would be hoping that the momentum of public opinion on this, an election win for the coalition, would wipe all those problems away. But yes, right now they are certainly big hurdles.
And Speersy, there is also disagreement in the federal coalition about the part that renewables should be playing in our future alongside this.
Yeah, and look, I did find it interesting that Peter Dutton has really sharpened his criticism of investors. He called them green millionaires, I think, talking up their own book, essentially. And, he's having a go there at those who have invested in green energy. David Littleproud not wanting to criticise people for putting a solar panel on their roof and a battery storage unit as well. They don't want to slow that down. But you do wonder whether this sort of uncertainty now, the prospect of a Dutton government emerging after the election, whether that does see some big investors pause, hit the brakes, reconsider boardroom decisions on big investments right now in industrial scale renewable projects. I mean, you heard David Littleproud, the Nationals leader, make it very clear he does have a big problem with these industrial scale solar and wind projects.
Our political lead, David Speers, thank you.
Thanks, Gemma.